Okay? Let's look at it like this. Let's say these circles all represent different power centers. Some of these could be families, they could be corporations, they could be religious groups, they could be ethnic groups, they could be, you know, anything, right? Some of them are more powerful than others, some of them are less powerful. Okay, let's say each of these circles represent different kind of factions or groupings within your country. Okay? If you create a government and it only includes these ones, what are the rest going to do? What are these guys likely going to do? Rebel, right? So the major problem with the Iraqi constitution was not only, hey, it's a Western thing that those people are not used to, not prepared for, don't have the widespread education to support, right? And they all distrust each other according to ethnic lines, Sunni, Shias, and Kurds, right? So there's no unity amongst them. And we come in and we say, so not only do we, you know, not legitimately come in and give them a new government, right? But then we totally leave out the whole concept of factions. And what we do is, let's say, let me clear out the page here. You've got the Kurds. So let's say these circles represent the Kurds in the north, okay? And then you've got the Sunnis, okay? And these people are more naturally allied with countries like Saudi Arabia and Jordan, okay? And they're a bigger group than the Kurds up here, okay? And then you've got the Shias. And the Shias are more naturally allied because Iran is a Shia majority country. So you've got Shias over here, okay? And they make up the largest grouping, something like 40, 45% of Iraqis, okay? Right? We set up a system of governance for them that basically centralized power quite a bit in Iraq, right? And then basically the majority rules. So in this situation, who's gonna control Iraq? The Shias. And that's exactly what happened. Okay? That's exactly what happened. It ticked off most of these guys, the Sunnis, right? And they started to rebel. Many of them went and joined up with ISIS. And many of them welcomed ISIS with open arms. Why? Because ISIS is made up of Sunnis. Now, many of those same people regret that now, and we're getting story after story about how horrible rule under ISIS has been. But it was not good under the Shiite-led government who controlled most of the country. They had their president in power. They controlled their kind of Congress, right? They controlled their judicial branch, right? And they also ignored another principle, which is called federalism. Federalism is a federation, right? So in the United States, we have a federation of states. That's why we call it the federal government, because it's federized governance of our state. Okay? Does that make sense? So we have this federation of states. Well, here we don't really have a federalized or a federated government here. We really have a national government here. And so the local groupings weren't really left to their own devices that much. They weren't given a lot of autonomous power either. So the Shiites really controlled everything because of that. The Sunnis didn't like it and rebelled, fell apart. Okay? All right, so that's kind of using Iraq as an example of how we really didn't understand our own principles of our own governance. Okay? So we've already talked about legitimacy. Federalism is where you give local autonomy to your localities or your states or your groupings, right? You give your local autonomy. And if you give them kind of local power, and then you have a more looser federation, right? Then you're not as threatened by your national government, right? You're not as threatened as, at the center, because you can have kind of your local autonomy, okay? And we've talked about factions, okay? But let's talk about a few more of these. Separation of powers, you guys all know this one, right? Executive, legislative, judicial, breaking up powers, right? And then, of course, checks. Who can give me an example of a check real quick? DJ just gave me a check mark. That was hilarious. Who can give me an example of a check within our government? Yeah, veto. Yeah. Or even just simply the House not passing a bill that the Senate does, or vice versa, right? Yeah. Yeah, 2/3 approval of it. Yeah, exactly. Good. Could be good. Okay. What's a balance, though? A lot of times we think of balance inaccurately. What is a balance? You know, Kaylee, see that's, you went out on a limb there, and that's awesome, but it's not about even power. A balance is sort of the opposite of a check. A check is where they can disagree and block each other, right? A balance is simply where they agree and work together. So when the president signs a bill as opposed to vetoing it, that's a balance. When the House and the Senate both vote a bill through, that's a balance. When the judicial branch upholds a law, that's a balance. It's kind of a, you think, well, why are they using the term balance there? You know, it's early English, but yeah, that's what a balance is specifically is. So when we say a system of checks and balances, we're not saying balancing power. We're saying where each power center has to agree for them all to work. Okay? So I mean, think about it. If a new bill goes into place that all cows should be purple in the United States, okay, then when a new bill goes into place, you can have the legislative branch enact the bill, right? It sounds pretty similar to a lot of the bills they have put in place. So all cows should be purple. Then the Senate has to come along and say, okay, yeah, all cows should be purple. Then the president comes along and let's say he signs it. Well, that's a balance. But not only does he have to sign it, that's just the first step. He has to execute that because he's the executive branch, right? That's what he does is he executes it, okay? So then he has to actually send out the manpower to go paint every cow purple in the United States, right? And then the local farmers, when they're like, hey, don't paint Bessie purple, I don't want Bessie to be purple, what's going on here? And they sue the federal government, then the judicial branch has to uphold that and say, no, you know, it says here in the Constitution, I don't know where, now cows can be purple and the government has the authority to choose what color cows should be, right? All the branches have to agree. Now, in that case, likely at least that last one wouldn't go through. The judicial branch would be like, no, you can't paint people's cows purple. You don't have the right to do that as a government. And then that would be a check at that point. So the entire government essentially has to agree for a law to actually not only put in place, but to continue from there. Okay? All right. Written Constitution, that one's pretty self-explanatory, but it's surprising how often in history governments did not have any sort of written system of governance and how many problems that creates for them, because basically it allows government to be executed on a whim, and often it is executed on a whim throughout history. So that's a big one. Enumerated powers, so actually not only writing down that Constitution, but saying, here's your powers, and you don't have other powers, right? Periodic elections, right? So actually allowing and kind of setting up a system for transferring power. Okay, an electoral college is another democratic form that we use here in the United States. The original electoral college was very different than the electoral college today. The electoral college originally was where you actually elected electors. You elected representatives, and they go and they actually vote, and they decide together who should become president. And we technically still do that today. We actually vote electors in, our legislative branch does, vote electors in, but every state in the union has a law that says those electors must go and vote for who wins the popular vote within the state. So I live in Utah. If Donald Trump wins by, you know, a certain percentage points, if he wins at all, if he wins the popular vote of the state of Utah, right, then he will, Donald Trump will, how do I say this? He will have electors, I think Utah 5, if I remember right, 5 or 6, something like that, electoral college votes, and they will go and put in their, yeah, the 5, Jonathan, they will go in and they have to vote for Donald Trump. Or if Hillary Clinton wins, then they have to vote for Hillary Clinton. So it's sort of removing the idea, which I think is an awesome idea. What if you just, instead of saying, here's who I think should be president, what if we actually just voted for people that we thought were really great and really smart, and we said, you go decide. So instead of electing someone who can run a good campaign or who's really good at going, this will be huge, you know what I mean, over and over and over and over. What if we got smart people together and they said, hey, let's go find someone we think will be really good at this, right? And it might not be someone who is like good at running a campaign, but is actually might be good at governing. That would be interesting. I think that's a better system, but it is less democratic because we don't vote ourselves, right? Yeah. Anyway, but that's how it was originally intended, but so we quickly moved away from it. Okay, this last one is one that is supposed, but one of your study guide questions is capitalism required to have a democracy, to have a liberal democracy? Most people suppose that it is. Is it or isn't? And right now in the world there is that debate. Western Europe is having that debate. Other countries are having that debate, okay? And by the way, vice versa. China is an autocratic capitalist country. It's not democratic, right? So they're actually autocratic and capitalist at the same time. It's kind of fascinating, okay? And then lastly, regulation of commerce. So these are, all of these are important democratic forms, but I just want to emphasize this first. I've already said it, but I want to emphasize it one more time. These are auxiliary precautions. They're not even secondary precautions. They're auxiliary. These are useful. These are important. These are good things, and they tend to get all the attention. But if you don't have a virtuous people and widespread education, you're likely not going to have a very strong government, people, nation. And a lot of people like to say that, you know, the United States is pretty dang awful. But if you travel the world, the United States is also pretty dang great. The United States is pretty dang peaceful. Do we have gun violence problems in the United States and murders and blah, blah, blah? Yeah, we do. We seriously do. 3,000 gun violence murders in Chicago alone this year. I mean, it's scary. But compared to a lot of countries, we have peaceful transitions of power. We have a fairly stable people. We have a fairly responsible people. We have people who follow laws for the most part. All things, you know, being considered, the United States is still pretty damn great. It's kind of interesting to consider it in that way. We do have a pretty decent education system. It's not the best. It needs vast improvement. My mission in life is to improve it. It's what we're doing here at Williamsburg, but it could be a lot worse, right? Interesting things to think about. All right. So the last thing that I wanted to ask you was just this: is capitalism necessary for the development of liberal democracy? Answer that in your study guides, okay? Answer that in your study guides. I think that's a fascinating question. That is the reason why I'm asking it, by the way, guys, is not because I feel like it isn't. I don't want to tell you how I feel, but it's more so it is a legitimate debate, especially a debate in the future that countries and peoples are having.